What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Mask and Health Solutions podcast, where I'm joined by a living legend, Chaz Gessner. How are you doing today, sir?
Legend in my own mind. I'm good. I'm good. I appreciate that intro.
Hey, man, the accolades are spectacular, nothing short of amazing. And like I said off air, man, most guys will never know what a Super Bowl feels like, let alone hold the damn thing. So, that's pretty, I mean, in its own right, man, that's a massive accomplishment. But I kind of want to start off the show with your background, your upbringing, university, and all that kind of stuff, and how you developed the mindset to basically go and achieve and now start one of the best companies that I've come across. So just kind of jump into your story, man.
Yeah, well, I'll dump my story on you. Yeah, I grew up an athlete, playing as many sports as I could possibly play and fit in the course of a year, and had the opportunity to go to college to an Ivy League school and play both football and lacrosse at Brown.
Nice.
So it was kind of a dream come true to be able to, in an era where it was, now it's even more hyper specialized as far as athletics, but it was, pretty rare to be able to have the opportunity to play more than one sport in college, especially at a, Division I level. And, and then you throw on top of that, just like the fact that I probably didn't belong at an Ivy League school in the first place. So I was trying to juggle the actual school part of it. And, yeah, so college was a really cool experience, being able to do that. And then took the most non-traditional path out of the Ivy League possible, and had an opportunity to play football professionally after that. And yeah, and just kind of scratched and clawed out a 7-8 year career, just kind of bouncing around team to team. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years in before I ever even got to play in a regular season game, which was looking back on it, really cool, wild. My rookie year in New England, got to experience winning a Super Bowl, like you had mentioned. But it was really a grind when I was going
Yeah.
through it, and all I wanted to do was get out on the field. I played in a ton of preseason games, and even went over to NFL Europe and played over there, and
Yeah, I saw that.
won a world championship over there, which was an amazing thing to be a part of. But the my NFL career was just kind of an exercise in just grinding it out and being patient and kind of waiting for my opportunity and trying to take advantage of it when it came. And then obviously you got to deal with the injuries and everything else that comes from that, but was lucky to escape relatively unscathed,
Yeah.
with my brain more or less intact, and
Yeah.
and my body just a couple of surgeries, which is kind of more than I could say for a lot of my ex teammates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then got after I stopped playing ball, got into the healthcare world. Was in medical sales for a long time. Worked at a bunch of big corporate medical sales companies like Stryker and Olympus, and
Hmm.
did total joints, knees, hips, those kind of things, the things that I'll probably end up having to get down the road at some point. And in and out of hospitals and doctors' offices, and I think just being exposed to the healthcare system, I kind of got my first real dose of how that the inner workings of that was, and kind of pretty quickly became pretty disenfranchised
Yeah.
with how that's all set up, and kind of that combination of that, and then going through my own personal journey of, at that point, I was really burnt out, and my hormones were shot, my adrenals were shot and stressed to the max, and kind of going right from having this ultimate goal and this purpose and this team and kind of almost brotherhood, with you, to none of that all of a sudden. I think has a lot of effects psychologically, let alone physiologically. So kind of led me to starting Vitality RX, and yeah, and haven't looked back since.
No, but that's honestly, it's kind of, I find that for a lot of dudes, usually the best things kind of originate from a place of pain, right? Usually we're motivated by pain or pleasure, but I find that pleasure is one of those things that's pretty fleeting. It's kind of like, I could do that and I could get this. But usually when you're in pain, that's when you really get forced into working, right? And it's interesting because you mentioned that it's almost like, you already accomplished all these different things. You're probably successful in your career, but at the same time, you're just like, I don't really feel that fulfilled by it. What was one of the biggest things that you saw in the medical system that kind of made you say, this isn't right, like something's off?
I think the biggest thing that jumps out is that it's obviously a much needed service, but it's built to help the people that are already sick or diseased or dying, right? It's not set
Yeah,
up to prevent you from getting to that point. And a lot of times, it's the really sad and depressing fact is by the time you get to that point, it's, largely too late
yeah,
sometimes. And I think there just wasn't really anything. I mean, granted, I was in kind of the hospital system, which is obviously more dealing with more acute care type issues. But just seemed to be really lacking as far as preventative medicine, and also, everything's so siloed, right?
yeah.
Not a whole lot that's looking. These are all complex, nuanced, specialized issues, right? That require an integrative solution, and that's just not how it's set up because a doctor can't possibly know everything, right?
No,
Like,
yeah.
and there just isn't a lot of collaboration. And so I think that's the biggest thing that jumps out.
Interesting. Because one of the things that I've noticed too, it's like you'll see somebody that's sick and the doctor will be like, well, you can eat whatever you want. And I'm like, that's interesting. So this guy's dying of cancer. They're telling him to drink red wine and eat pizza. Like it doesn't really affect it in any which way. It's almost like they write people off in that system. And it's almost like just come through, we'll cut a paycheck here, get this therapy. It might work, it might not. Nutrition doesn't really matter because that's for the hokey pokey, hippies over there that actually think this does something. And it's interesting because you mentioned the fact that they siloed all these things off and they separate these things. Why do you think they do that? You think it's just to make profit, or is that just kind of the way the system is set up?
I think it's just kind of the way the system is set up, right? It's a lack of knowledge, and I think there's some stat. I think it's traditional MDs spend less than a couple of weeks on nutrition in
Yeah.
medical school. There's just so much for them to learn and pay attention to, and there's so much around sickness and disease and treating that it would be impossible. I think but you would think that would mean that the system would be set up for doctors to really work closely with nutritionists and dietitians. And I mean, especially now with the metabolic dysfunction that's rampant, and diabetes 1 and 2, and they're calling Alzheimer's diabetes 3 now, right? I mean,
Wow.
it's gotten so out of control, and there just is not enough collaboration, and it's no fault of their own. Like I said, it's just a lack of knowledge. I think the one thing that kind of ruffles my feathers a little bit is that I'd like to see more of a traditional MD, maybe like a primary care doc, saying, I don't know, right? Like, or
Yeah.
this isn't my area of expertise, instead of offering an opinion on something that very clearly isn't based in a lot of knowledge. I just think they're just not learning that stuff.
No, yeah, it's kind of interesting though, because what I'm seeing more and more is that people like yourself, professionals that are in this industry, are starting to notice that, and because of that, it's almost like you guys are creating your own version of medicine, let's say, because it's kind of Vitality RX. Like I was looking at your team, I'm like, okay, this is a team. This is a team effort. You guys are trying to put together a group of people to figure out what's wrong with a individual. And it's not so much as cut and dry, like, oh, you know what? Yeah, he's good. Just take some medicine. I'm gonna prescribe you some things that are sponsored by my favorite company, and you'll be good to go. You'll be out of here in half an hour, and everything's gonna be awesome. But in your situation in creating Vitality RX, what does your team look like, and what is it that they do when they assess a guy that comes in and says, "Hey, I'm not feeling so hot"?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is kind of just a shift in how you look at it and approach it, and think about these problems being kind of complex and layered problems. But I think once you do that and kind of shift that way of thinking and looking, it's more wellness than it is
Yeah.
healthcare, right? And it's what's total wellness look like. And so then it becomes important to assemble a team that has that, where you can hit it from all angles, right?
Yeah.
Like we got a guy on the team that's got his master's in exercise physiology. We got a guy on the team that's a naturopathic doctor. We got a guy on the team that's an MD, a urologist that's the director of men's health at a big hospital here in Southern California. We got a lot of advisors across different specialties, ranging from psychology all the way to family medicine. So I think just being able to have all of those different perspectives and listen to everyone in the room has allowed us to kind of build protocols that are truly integrative, where we can, attack the root of these problems as opposed to just band-aids for symptoms.
100%. The beauty of it, it's almost like when you're saying that, knowing your background, it's almost like, all right, you set up your lineman, you set up your safety, it's like quarterbacks
Yeah.
over here. But at the same time, it's almost like if you do want to reach an objective, why would you just let, like, okay, I'm going to tell the safety to figure out what's wrong with this guy, or do something that's not like outside of his realm of knowledge. And I find that beautiful because you're right. You need a team to really figure out what's going on with one person. It's not just usually one thing that's wrong with us and that like needs help, let's say, because you can't band-aid it, right? It's like this guy might be suffering from ED, but needs to talk to the psychologist and he doesn't need the urologist. And sometimes it happens, right? And I find that your approach makes a lot more sense and probably is going to give you a lot better return, um, based off of the fact that it is holistic. And that's the one thing that I find that, I mean, allopathic medicine is great in a way for acute problems, but like you said, for wellness and for actually feeling good all the time, I feel that you really need this approach. And I love seeing the fact that you're making a massive shift and you're going in that direction. But I wanted to ask you about the biggest issue that you see in men. What is the number one thing that you're seeing more and more where you're just like, here we go again, like a common theme or a common thread amongst guys?
I think we're fixers, right? So we just want to fix things as fast as possible. I think the lack of patience is the biggest thing, and
Yeah.
a lack of understanding around this being an issue of lifestyle, right? It's like everything is set up, like even just in our society in general, to move towards like what's the quick fix, what's the silver bullet. Like, I think even, we'll recommend very specific vitamins, let's say, to fill in some deficiencies in someone's diet. They'll take the vitamins for 2 weeks and say, someone will take the
Yeah.
vitamins for 2 weeks and then say, this isn't working. I don't feel better. It's like, well, that's not really exactly the mechanism. Like that's not what we're going for. We're trying to support the system, right? And like to your point about allopathic medicine is like, it's great, and you can actually use allopathic medicine effectively, preventatively, and
Mhm.
that's kind of what, but it's great when used in conjunction with holistic and naturopathic medicine, right? Like if you approach it, you approach the diet, right, and you approach the lifestyle factors like exercise and sleep and stress management and things like that, and then you put that with supplementation to fill in the gaps from the diet of things that you might not be getting, and then you put that with some kind of a pharmaceutical intervention that's in causing the body to produce more of something or work more efficiently in some way,
Yeah.
as opposed to replacing something right off the bat, or that kind of deal. I mean, that's the perfect combination, and that goes back to the team concept. And
Yeah.
you know had a front row seat for probably the team that's proved to be the best in the world at accountability and just doing your job, right? The New England Patriots. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? It's like
Yeah.
you gave the analogy about the safety and the linebacker and then the quarterback, and everybody's got their role, and it's do your job, right? Don't try to overstep, don't do too much. I need your expertise, you need my expertise. Let's combine this and then all move towards a goal together.
100%. Because the way I kind of see it, you're 100% right. Like you can't be bouncing around trying to do too much, and you can't expect somebody that's kind of out of their realm to fix an issue that's completely foreign to them, right? And I guess as men, you're right. We are usually, it's not until we have an actual issue that we'll go into the doctor. You know, a urologist that I talked to said the same thing. It's like, well, this guy has kind of been, you know, his erections were kind of not where they needed to be for years. But it wasn't until it didn't
Yeah.
get up at all where he's like, oh shit, I got to get in and I got to talk to somebody because this is a real issue. And the urologist told him, like, bro, you could have fixed this problem like 5 years ago. How'd you talk to me then? Right.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
want to
like,
change my answer. That's actually the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing is that there's just guys wait until it's too late. Yeah, for sure. And then some of that's ego, and some
yeah.
of that's just kind of the way we are, not wanting to ask for help. You know, yeah, being
No,
embarrassed about it.
well, I mean, it's natural. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, that's the flag you stake in the ground, man. That's I don't know, it's a big part of you, right? And psychologically, I think that would mess with a lot of guys. And as we get older, it's kind of one of those things that if you know, if you don't take care of certain aspects of your body, they're not going to function all that well the older you get, right? And
Totally.
preventative measures are the best way to go about it, in my opinion, because a lot of people that I talk to, they say the same thing. It always comes down to like mind, body, and soul. If your mind's off, you know it's probably not going to work right. If your body's off, it's probably not going to work right. And if something's bugging you, you're stressed out, your cortisol's through the roof, it's still probably not going to work right. Which is why, you
Yeah,
know, the
yeah,
team
it's a
approach
perfect
makes
example.
perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people forget, right? Like hormones are produced and regulated in the brain.
Yeah,
It's a mental health issue, right? Like I'm not saying that psychological problems are the only problems that can cause hormone dysfunction, but it's a factor, right? And like it
100%.
can't be
Yeah.
ignored, right? Like you tend to hear hormones and you think about it as like, oh, that's like you know how strong you are, or
Yeah.
like you know that's what your muscles look like or what you look like physically, but it's very much so you know a process that's regulated in the brain,
Yeah.
you know, which by default means that you know the mental health is a big component of it, you know, that cannot be ignored.
No, yeah. And it's funny because we talk a lot about mental health, and you know, I know men's suicide is through the roof, and I understand all these different things, but at the same time, I feel like when a man tries to open up and talk about these things, society still kind of neglects him, or they bring up the whole toxic masculinity side of things, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I find that toxic masculinity is more like that's more something related to like the simps and the guys that aren't successful, and those are usually things attributed to them, but they see a big strong man, they're just like, oh, you know, toxic male automatically. And I kind of find that society's in this weird spot where men are kind of being neglected in that sense. However, I do feel that mentally we do got to take care of ourselves, and regardless of what society might be trying to tell us, you know, we got to make sure that we are working optimally, functionally, and that's just kind of where we can basically be our best and make society better, regardless of what they might be thinking about us. But that being said, you know, I did want to bring up TRT and HRT. You know, what does TRT really do? And in your opinion, what does it do to like maximize men? Just like, you know, is it something that, you know, starts to decrease as we get older? Like, how does TRT really work in your opinion?
Well, I think first off, it's important to make a distinction between hormone therapy and TRT, right? TRT
Okay.
is a type of hormone therapy, right? And TRT, you know, in our opinion, is a last resort, right? Like that's replacing something that's there that we, you know, the mechanism is broken to produce
Gotcha.
testosterone, right? And so now we have to replace it. But there's a lot, there's a lot of steps to go to get to before you get to the TRT. You know, I think one of our like really the vast majority of hormone therapies that we do, we actually call a reboot program, right? And we're rebooting and rebalancing the body's natural hormone production, right? You know, we want to balance the ratio between testosterone to estrogen. That's an important one, right? Like we want to look at luteinizing hormone and see, okay, is luteinizing hormone low? Because LH is actually what signals to the testes to produce more testosterone. So could
Oh,
we give
okay.
you something, if that LH is low, could we give you something to boost your LH, which in turn will boost your own testosterone production,
Okay.
which is just a much more natural way of going about that process. You know, and then, you know, obviously if your body's converting too much testosterone to estrogen, you can kind of block that
Regulate that.
aromatization, yeah, and regulate that. And you want to support the system and the metabolic pathways as you're doing that. You know, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. And
Wow.
I think that's important to talk about and raise awareness around, so that people don't hear hormones and automatically think that means TRT, and I don't want to do TRT, right? The guys have different. There's different reasons why. What ranging from like I hate needles all the way to I don't want to be dependent on it forever, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot in between there to kind of play with, and a lot of ways to approach it. But I think kind of back to what we were talking about in terms of why men wait till it's too late is we're all busy, right? Like
Yeah,
everybody's got a lot
yeah.
going on. You know, you got the wife, you got the kids, you got the job, you got all this stuff, and you know it's that's why we're turning to quick fixes. We don't have time to go to the doctor and do this, that, and the other. And that's one of the things we try to address with Vitality X, and kind of try to make it feel like a quick fix, but we're actually getting diagnostics, right? And we're actually
Yeah.
measuring and managing these biomarkers over a period of time, so that we can not only determine what you need first before we just start giving you something, but then what's the efficacy? Is that working? Is it not working? You know,
Yeah.
any of these other companies that are trying to sell you a product, there's no diagnostics behind it, right?
Yeah.
And typically, in order for there to be diagnostics behind it, it's a huge, pun intended, pain in the ass, right? To go through that process of like going into the doctor, or you know, getting, you know, whatever. So we just try to remove as many of those barriers as possible, make that super easy to track your biomarkers. You know, we're launching an in-home test kit soon. That's a really
Nice.
cool piece of technology. I actually have it right here. It's called a tasso, but it's like a little, you've seen those CGMs, like the little
Yeah, yeah,
continuous
yeah. The
glucose.
glucose,
It's kind
yeah.
of, yeah, it's kind of looks like that. It's like the size of a silver dollar. And you just stick it on your shoulder and click this little red button. And then it pokes a little hole, and a little bit of blood gets collected in that tube. And then you just pull it off, and then put the cap on this and throw it in the box and send it in. And we can get an introductory panel on you
Wow. That,
from that. So yeah, it's just making it a lot easier.
well, the simplified, I mean, it's like a streamlined process what you got going on, man. I mean, for anybody, yeah, because you're 100% right. We're all busy. Usually, that's probably one of the contributing factors to us being so stressed out all the time and having cortisol levels through the roof.
Yeah,
But that
totally.
being said, it's kind of like what I find is this is the best alternative to having to go to a doctor, sit here, go talk to this other guy, then I got to talk to somebody else. Whereas you have a whole team, you have a group of guys that are specialized, you know, in different aspects of men's health, so you can just one stop shop, like get in, get out, right? And I think that that's huge, man. That's gonna be a game changer.
Totally. And I think it's important to, you know, to have that type of approach, but also to try to keep it simple. Right. I think there can be information overload. There can be, you know, I think the biggest thing that we see is compliance, right? Like
Yeah,
sticking to, like, you know, taking like for vitamins, for instance. The way we try to solve that problem is we do like these little individual packs, right? So like this is my pack of
nice.
vitamins. It has my vitamins. So every day, this has, instead of opening 6 pill bottles and taking
Yeah.
one pill out of each bottle or whatever, every day, this is my pack. And it's not a
Yeah.
multivitamin. These are all single ingredient, high potency vitamins that would be the same as if you know, bought a vitamin from, you know, Pure Encapsulations or Douglas Labs or one of the
Top
top
end.
supplement
Yeah.
brands. But you don't have to actually sort them every day on your own, which means you know, there's a better chance of you actually taking them every day, which has to happen in order for them to work, really,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to build these vitamins and minerals up. Your body's made of vitamins and minerals, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you're not going to just take a vitamin and then that's like taking a medication, right? Like you want to support your body's own natural process through these. That's by definition supplement, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not meant to take place of, it's meant to supplement your diet.
Exactly. No, because like I was telling you before, I mean, dude, supplements are supposed to be supplemental to what you already have built, right? I mean, you have a
100%.
foundation, then you just kind of add to it. The way I see supplements, it's kind of like, yo, man, that's like painting a house, but you got to have a house in order to paint it. Where a lot of
For
guys come in,
sure.
they're like, "Yo, I'm gonna paint this shitty ass house that I have, even though everything's falling apart." I'm like, "Don't do that, man. Like, don't worry about the
Yeah.
supplements until the time is right." But the other thing that I love about that setup is that, man, compliance would be a lot easier if you have everything that's already made for you in that way, right? In that fashion. So I think, that would be, I mean, even for myself, man, I got like 4 different bottles I gotta open. I'm like, all right, L-carnitine, zinc,
Yeah, yeah,
magnesium,
that's the
right?
thing. Yeah, just got to make it easier, right? Try to remove as many barriers as possible. But like you said, it's definitely meant to supplement a healthy diet, not to take place of. And we try to stress that as much as possible. And that's why it's with supplements, it's good to get labs before you start taking supplements so that you know what you're deficient in, right? Like
Yeah.
you can get a lot of information from telling somebody that knows what they're talking about, what your dietary habits are. Like I could ask you like, hey, how much fish do you eat per week? How many servings of green leafy vegetables do you eat per week? Like, do you tend to have any digestive issues typically? What are your energy levels like that kind of stuff. I can ask you maybe 10 questions and I can get a pretty good idea of what we would probably need to be able to supplement your lifestyle. But that can be addressed with diet, right? So it's like
Yeah.
if your answer is that you don't eat a lot of fish, you don't eat a lot of green leafy vegetables, maybe the answer is eat more fish and more
More
green leafy
vegetables.
vegetables
Yeah.
as opposed to taking a supplement, right? But like that's in a perfect world. And we don't live in a perfect world. And people are on the go and it's sometimes tough to do that. And that's where, you can kind of add in a little bit of help along the way.
No, 100%. That's kind of, I mean, I get it. Like I'm one of those guys too, where sometimes, I don't even get my entire protein intake and I track everything, right? So I try to do a good job, but even then there's days where it's like, okay, I'm 10 grams off, I'm 20 grams off. Am I gonna take that last protein shake? No, I'll probably just go to sleep. I'm not really gonna follow through the whole way. But at least this way you're able to build something, some type of regimen where people know where they're at, they know what they got to build, and at least they're conscious about it, right? Especially for guys, because if we're conscious about it, then usually over time when we build those habits, we'll actually follow through, right? And
Totally. It's about habits. Yeah. 100%. If you try to rely on just self-discipline all the
nah.
time, yeah, it's like Jocko Willing talks about that all
Yeah.
the time, right? Like if you're relying on just self-discipline to get yourself through, then you're fucked.
Yeah.
Part of my language, but you know what I mean? It's like because there will always come a day where you don't have the motivation to do something, right? And if
Oh,
you
dude.
live in this fantasy world where you're pretending like you're always going to be ultra motivated, then you're screwed.
No,
So it's
motivation
building
is
the
fleeting,
habits.
man. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you because there's some days where you wake up and you're like, I totally want to make sure I take my vitamins and I'm good to go. And then there's other days where I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna do this, man. Like, what's the point, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's like that, and I'm glad you kind of brought up tracking also because I think that's a really important thing that kind of feeds into the issue of habits. But I feel like every conversation I'm having these days, I say at least once like what gets measured gets managed,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like that's such a spot on statement, and it's so true. And it's like if you're not measuring, like you're tracking your protein intake, there's a stat around, I think it's around calorie intake, and it's
Oh,
some
yeah.
crazy number. Like 80% of people underestimate how many calories they actually eat in a day, and like
Yeah.
for obese people, it's even more or something like
Yeah.
that, right? So like if you're not tracking these things, like you tend to think in your mind like, oh, I eat a ton of protein, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like by the way, this is an aside, but I feel like every woman I have a conversation with about hydration, right? I'm like, oh, are you drinking enough water? And they're like, yeah, I drink a ton of water. And I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I've seen you. You drank 3 glasses of water all day. Like that's not a ton
Yeah.
of water. Yeah, but
Well,
you have to track things so that you can actually manage them. And then not only does it make it easier to manage them, but the psychological component of tracking them makes you more aware of them. And in the awareness lies the solution.
100%, man. Because it's like that whole thing about you're unconsciously incompetent. And to your point about the calories, most people, I think they underestimate by about 30%. So usually most
Yeah.
people's caloric intake is 30% or even 50% higher on
Or
average, and that's an
mhm.
average, and that's kind of why, if you look at everybody's like bellies that just keep growing, it's one of those things where it's pretty sneaky, and especially with processed foods too, and the way they package it, the way they label everything, I feel like it's all trickery all the
For
way through,
sure.
because like they'll tell you like, oh, if you eat a portion of this bag, but then most people just look at the back and don't even realize it. It's like one third of the bag is like 200 calories, but you're taking in 600 calories. Then you lie to yourself and you're like, well, I only had 200 calories here.
Yeah.
It wasn't that much.
Yeah. 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 I fell prey to an element of that actually fairly recently. I decided to cut out gluten and dairy for a little while just to try to lower the inflammation, right? And it was just for a period of time. I was kind of doing some self experimentation, but
Yeah.
in the process of finding gluten-free and or dairy-free foods, it's like these foods are in the health food stores, right? Like, and you're
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, this is a healthy option, right? I'm doing like oat milk or whatever,
Or
and I'm
rice
thinking
milk.
like, yeah, whatever, right? And I'm like, oh, this is a healthier option than dairy. The binders and the fillers and the preservatives and all the
Yeah.
other shit that's getting put in this stuff, let alone the sugar, right? Like
Oh,
just
dude.
how
Yeah.
processed this stuff is. It doesn't matter if it says gluten free. Like if it's ultra processed, like that's a problem and it's just going to cause a different problem. Right. And so it's really hard. It's hard. It's tough out there to kind of, I mean, as unless you're sticking to a largely whole foods Mediterranean style diet, which
Yeah.
is kind of hard to do in this day and age, especially if you're on the go. And then you're opening yourself up to all sorts of problems. And these are problems that are new problems, right? They're new problems with long-term effects, which is the worst kind, right? Because they're new, so they're not studied. They're long-term effects, so they're also not studied and also would be really hard to study, right? But like we're up against a different world and environment than our dads were,
Yeah.
especially our grandfathers. Like it's just a different environment. So like thinking like just because your dad or your granddad lived to 100 and he ate whatever the hell he wanted and he drank like 3 glasses of whiskey a night or whatever before bed, it's like that shit doesn't fly anymore because
No.
we're in a different world. It's just a different set of rules.
No, and it's so true, dude. Because the more I look into the studies about sperm motility, testosterone, even a man's handshake has gone down. But one of the biggest contributing factors that nobody talks about is the micronutrients in the soil, right? So our soil is shit, and that's where we get our food. That's what's supposed to supply us with all the stuff that we need. And you see it in developing kids where a lot of autoimmune issues are coming up. GH tract is like there's so many things that are just compounding and making it even harder to just stay in shape. Like back in the 70s, everybody was skinny, but there wasn't so many ultra processed foods. Like that was a relatively new thing. And then come around the 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, like where we're at right now, I think obesity is like, I think it's 1 in 3 people is obese now, like technically. Or you're at 30% body fat, which to me is still like, yo, that's a massive number. And it's something that I feel that if we don't actually take control of that, eventually, and I get it, they're all about this new movement too about what is it? You're beautiful in the
Body
skin you're in.
positivity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like, I told
it's
my
fine.
son, yeah, I'm like, my kid asked me, he's like, I'm like, it's bullshit. Listen,
Yeah.
man, you gotta stay healthy.
Yeah,
Stay
it's not
healthy.
about body. It's fine. It's fine, right? Like if you're in that spot, it's fine. But that's not the issue. We're not talking about
No.
how you look. Like that part doesn't really matter. Like it mattered, but it matters, but for a different reason, right? It's like, are you healthy?
Yeah,
That's what matters. And by default, if you're healthy, you're not going to be obese. And that's
exactly.
just the yeah.
And the
But
obesity
it's
is,
tough. It's tough. It's tough for people, right? Because like this stuff happens in childhood in a lot of
dude,
circumstances, and then it
yeah.
becomes exponentially harder and harder and harder as you move through life. And there's a lot of psychological components to it and things like that. So it's like it's almost like can we talk about it in two separate
Separate things,
conversations,
yeah.
right? Like for sure you're 30 years old and you're obese. There I have empathy and I want to try to help and I want you to be happy and be positive and not beat yourself up because you're not some other ideal of beauty. But like let's not project that onto the youth that have a chance to do things right and be healthy, and let's not let that bleed over and cloud that
100%.
conversation.
Well, yeah, it's kind of because they'll look at these role models. Like I brought it up before, where what's that girl's name? Lizzo, right? Where everybody loves like, oh yeah, she's a big girl, but she's doing the thing. Yes, queen. All I'm like, okay, that's all fine and dandy, and I get it. She's very confident. She loves the skin she's in. Blah blah blah. But then I saw her actually eat, and my son showed me a video. She ate more food than I'll eat for about 2 days for breakfast. And I'm like, that is not healthy, man. That is extremely wrong. And I'm just looking at like I'm calculating her calories for her. I'm like, she just had 8 pancakes, 2 teaspoons of butter. She put
Yeah.
whipped cream. Then she followed that up with waffles, breakfast sausages, bacon. And I'm like, we have to get more positive role models in. And we have to get guys thinking about like, okay, how do I get in shape? How do I take care of myself? And kind of make that. And it's like to your point about separating the two things, maybe we should. It's like, yeah, love the body you're in, but also seek optimal health. Because
Health.
if you don't,
Yeah.
you're gonna die. Like, or you suffer a chronic disease that nobody wants to see you get, right? And like my wife was telling me about a case just recently where there was a kid that's 16 who got Alzheimer's. And they're trying to say that, oh, it's not related to diet or anything. I'm like, there's got to be an environmental factor tied into that because that's something that's so I mean, that is just so foreign to what the teenager experience should be like, man. So I definitely feel that we got to do something in that regard. But
Yeah,
the other
and
thing,
to bring that all full circle, right? Like we would, in order to change that paradigm, the support of the healthcare system would be needed. And like we said, it's just not set up that way, right? Like when someone comes in because they have a disease or a disorder or a sickness or whatever it is, right? Like there's little time spent on what caused this to happen because we got to take care of this issue, right? Like
yeah,
it's an acute problem. You have these symptoms. It's my responsibility to help you try to alleviate these symptoms. So it's just not set up for trying to prevent that from happening in the first place. So a doctor's not telling you when you come in, okay, let's dig into your past, let's figure out what this is. Like that's the long route, right? Like they don't
yeah,
have time to tell you that or do that. It's not how it's set up. Like whereas like it would make sense like to do that and say, okay, let's dig into your past, let's dig into your habits, let's try to figure out what caused this. Let's have that be one component of what we're
yeah,
doing. And then let's triage the acute issue right now, right? Like if we have to use medication or whatever it is, but then let's also hit that other foundational component of it. Let's try to reverse what was causing it in the first place. And then maybe in time, you don't have to be dependent on this medication or you won't
yeah,
have this problem or whatever it is. And my thought around that is not let's train the doctors to do that. It's like let's um encourage more collaboration between professionals, healthcare professionals, and let's create more of a wellness based solution. And let's mix the doctors with the wellness professionals and create a more integrated solution, which is,
Vitality
not
RX,
to
man. Like,
okay,
yeah, I
not to
was
keep
gonna
saying
say,
it.
I'm like, bro, it's like the way I see it,
That's the
the
goal. It's
system.
the goal. Yeah.
But that kind of goes to your point. Well, it goes to your creation and what you've made is that you saw an issue, you saw what's not working, and you put together Vitality RX. That's the way I see it, anyways, right? And that's kind of why I think this may be the model for the future because what we're doing right now is not working. Like it's just not. And that's why I'm so passionate about this because it really irks me when they keep telling an obese person or somebody suffering from cancer, somebody with a disease, hey, just don't change your lifestyle habits, just take this drug. I'm like, it's not going to work, right? It might work in some situations, right? It might work, but at the same time, we're seeing that a lot of the times it doesn't even work. Like I look at, man, the one that irks me more than anything is their fucking food chart, dude. Like what is that? Like I'm
Yeah.
like, this is the most ridiculous, stupidest food
So
chart
bad.
ever created, man. And it was
So
made like
bad.
back in the 60s. I'm like, is anybody going to talk about the fact that we got an overconsumption of carbs and fats? Like the thing is literally
So
backwards.
bad. So bad. And the food industry is monopolized by the big
Oh,
companies and blah, 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 blah. We could go all the way down that rabbit
yeah,
hole,
that rabbit
but
hole.
it's bad. Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, the only way to avoid it is whole foods, Mediterranean diet, which sucks. It's hard, and it's expensive, right? Like
It is. Yeah.
that's the other shitty thing. And of course, you know, big food is going to continue to do as much as they possibly can to keep that dynamic that way, right? And then there's just like just the fact that it's hard to source these things, and so it's, you know,
Yeah.
gonna be more expensive. But that's the whole thing, right? That's why it's a lifestyle, like,
Yeah.
because you have to really have that habit and really have that desire to, because it's not easy,
No.
right? Like, and so it has to become a habit and a lifestyle, in order to, like we said, in order to be able to overcome the lack of motivation sometimes.
Yeah. But it's kind of like, I find for myself too, it's like if you set yourself up for success, you will be successful. At least in this realm, as far as nutrition go, I feel pretty good, and I'm like, well, I've succeeded pretty good, and I make sure my kids eat the salmon. It's because we prep for it, and you got to be conscious about it. You got to prep for it, and you got to make that time for it. And I feel like a lot of people, like you said before, like we're busy, just give me that quick fix, right? And I find that at the same time, it's almost like if you do want to get better, if you do want to develop yourself, like well, that's what this podcast is about. It's like, hey, take some time for yourself as a man. What can you do? Go to vitalityrx.com, and check out
Yeah.
the services offered there or do something, right? But in regards to that, I did want to ask you about peptides with the time that we have left. What are peptides and what do they do?
Yeah, so peptides are basically just chains of amino acids, right? And so they induce certain functions in the body. So it's kind of a much more natural and holistic approach, rather than just like we were talking about with testosterone replacement therapy, for instance, which is just replacing a hormone that's gone. It's,
Yeah,
can you push the body to produce more of something, or can you push a mechanism, or block a receptor so that something doesn't get processed in a certain way, things like that. And, the problem with peptides is that there's so many out there, there's so much information. It's like the regulation of these things is largely uh fragmented and fractured, and you got companies that are selling them for research purposes only, and you don't really know the purity and the potency of stuff, and it's just really tough. It's tough to find. And then on top of that, like for instance, we're a California-based company. If you're going to prescribe peptides in California, you actually can't order them from a source outside of California and have
uh,
them sent into California. So it kind of makes that an issue. And we've obviously seen kind of the rise and the fall of like the pharmacies like TaylorMade pharmacy in the US that kind of, got a lot of, there was all of a sudden they were everywhere and they were distributing all these peptides. And then they, basically had too much heat, too much attention on them, and got shut down and regulated, and have had to kind of pivot out of that. So it's one of those things. I think, it's a very interesting conversation to have, and it's where medicine is hopefully heading. But it's still very, very early. And it's tough because there aren't a lot of, double blind, placebo controlled,
studies. Yeah,
randomized, yeah, clinical studies. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and so
yeah,
it's hard for me to talk about them without it sounding like I'm just trying to kind of sell you something. But it's like you have to really trust the source, and you can't just buy peptides off the internet and expect that they're going to be even what they're advertised to be, let alone efficacious
yeah,
for the purpose. But there are some really good ones, and there's some really promising stuff out there. I mean, there's one, ipamorelin plus CJC, that pushes growth hormone production in the body, is great. There's one called DSIP, Delta Sleep Inducing Peptide, which I love because sleep is obviously where your body repairs and
huge.
rebalances and is
Yeah,
huge. And if you can improve the quality of the delta wave sleep, then that's your deep recovery sleep. And I track it on my Whoop, and
yeah,
I've
yeah.
nerd out on all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and things like BPC 157, that's great. Like I used that when I had hip surgery for recovery, and you can actually even use that, like the oral BPC 157, to repair your gut. And there's there's a lot of cool ones out there, and it's definitely warrants further conversation. But
Yeah.
the regulatory bodies that be are really making it tough. And like, the drug research is founded by big pharma, right? Like
Yeah.
what's peptide research going to be funded by, right? Like it's in direct competition to big pharma.
Big
So
pharma, yeah.
who's funding it? So that's the problem, and that's what's always going to be the case, for a long time probably.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's frustrating.
Yeah, it is because
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I mean, big pharma, it just seems like, I mean, from what I've researched, and I mean, a lot of this stuff's already out there. We can look at Oxycontin, you can look at all kinds of different things that exist. It just seems like they have their stranglehold on the quote unquote health, side of things, which I honestly don't find to be too healthy for the most part, right? But that's just my opinion. But when it comes to peptides, it seems like there's a massive misunderstanding. And even for myself, like I told you off air, like I thought that it was just another form, like I thought it was a PED and that was all it was. In
Mhm.
the same way as diuretics or blood doping or any, that's where I thought, peptides kind of lived, right? But from what you're telling me, it's something that, we can just kind of take the way the body works, manipulate it, and use it in our favor. Like, how is that a bad thing? I just don't understand that. I can't wrap my head around why we're not really using this to our full advantage, which to me continues to boggle the mind. But it's awesome to see that you're actually putting this in practice and making it so that guys can use this to really maximize their lives. But the one question
Mhm.
I had in regards to peptides, like, is it allowed in sports or are there certain different things that are, like bodies of or different organizations, I guess, that kind of ban it? Because you were in the NFL when you had your hip surgery, right? And you used it.
No, I actually had the hip surgery not that long ago. So
Oh, okay, okay.
it was wear and tear from the
From
sports.
yeah,
From that. Yeah. No, I think I think most guys now are utilizing peptides that are in probably across all professional sports, because it's more or less like taking a vitamin, right?
yeah,
Like you're pushing a natural mechanism in the body, and these are amino acids, right? They're not foreign drug compounds. So you can't necessarily even test for them even if you wanted to. So yeah, but I think that the dangerous part about that is like, again, like we said, how do you know who to trust? Like whatever, like,
yeah.
you could be getting a peptide and it could have something else in it because it's manufactured at a plant where another drug is, and that could be on the banned substance
Oh,
list.
gotcha.
And you could
Yeah,
get popped for that, and then 3 game suspension or whatever it is, and like that can derail a career,
gotcha.
sometimes. And so it's just one of those things. And I think unfortunately that's been pushed underground in pro sports because a lot of it has to do with the optics, right? Like you admitted yourself that you think of it like it's like a performance enhancer, right? And
Yeah,
like, so if your fans think that you're cheating, right? Like that's not a good look.
yeah,
So guys are really secretive about it. And then because guys are secretive about it, it's not on the open. People aren't talking about it. It's not a collaborative thing. Guys are going to some shady source and getting something because they don't want anybody to find out. And like, that can make things worse
but
in a lot of instances.
are you finding with a lot of like your NFL contacts though that they are, do because I would imagine a lot of them come to see you about these things too. Like, and if it's all legal and it's all good, do you find that a lot of guys are using more peptides to just kind of recover? Because, dude, I can't imagine going through a full season and being like, yeah, I'm good to go, just bounce back. I'm like, hell no, man. Like, you need some
Yeah.
serious recovery.
Yeah, guys are finding it. Guys are finding it, and they're coming to us. We try to stay away as much as we possibly can from active professional athletes, just because of the dangers there, right? Like
Yeah.
in something being tainted or something being on a banned list, or just really not wanting to do anything. And so for them, it becomes much more important. Like we talked about, like the fundamentals become much more important. Like
Yeah.
sleep is the best drug a professional athlete could possibly
Yeah.
use, right? Like, and then there's just other things like hyperbaric oxygen chambers and,
Yeah.
cold plunge and sauna and hot tub and all those different types of, modalities that don't include any kind of supplementation. Um, but we tend to get the guys that are done playing, right? And now let's fix your body,
Yeah.
right? It's like let's fix the damage that's done. When you're in it, it's like you're in it, and you know that what you're sacrificing is, you're sacrificing your body, you're sacrificing a little bit of comfort for the goal. And then kind of when you're done, it's like, okay, like how do we repair this? Obviously, you can mitigate a lot of that damage by doing the right things when you're playing, and I think guys are becoming a lot more aware of that than they used to. Like, when I was playing, it's like, everybody was just jumping in a cold tub and that's it, really. You got guys eating cheeseburgers, and I mean, like, there was a team. I won't say what the team was, but it's like on Fridays were called Pizza Fridays,
What?
and in the locker room, like after we'd have like kind of a real light practice on Friday,
Yeah.
because the game would be on Sunday, and then we'd come in and then there'd be wings and pizza in the locker room, right? And it's like, holy shit, I'm sure that doesn't exist anymore, but it's like,
Yeah.
you know, just the understanding around this stuff just has has come a long way, really.
Well,
But yeah, I
it's
mean, like to your point too, I think that ties into also like, we work with a lot of veterans, and I think it's
oh,
the
okay.
same. It's, they're dealing with, I was thinking with your earlier point when you were talking about, suicide and this
Mental
becoming a
health,
bad
yeah.
problem, mental health, and that reminded me of that. And these are, in a lot of ways, like we work with the SEAL Future Foundation, which helps transition former Navy SEALs into civilian life, right? And like these are the most elite war fighters on the planet, right? Like
Yeah.
the most badass alpha dudes on the planet, right? And they're done, and then all of a sudden, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So like there's the psychological component of not having a team, not having a common goal, not having a purpose, not having that brotherhood and that family around you, all that stuff. That messes with your mind. And then you're going through all these physiological issues. The high stress environment that creates like, fight or flight mode, and you're dumping stress hormones and cortisol and all that stuff. And what's happening with these guys is that when they get out, they're rightfully so, they're depressed because they're dealing with that. Uh, they're going to the VA and they're being prescribed antidepressants, right? Or they're saying like, hey, I'm in pain, I have inflammation. They're being prescribed painkillers, right? And it's like no one's even looking at their hormones unless a guy demands it, and then maybe they look at testosterone. And if testosterone's above 300, they're like,
Yeah, you're good.
you're
Yeah.
good, you're normal, right? So it's like just by looking at that one component alone, and by no means is it a silver bullet or a panacea, but like just by looking at the foundational component of hormone function, right, which is affected by all of those environmental factors, but then also when you consider TBI, right, traumatic brain injury, which, riding a roller coaster can induce what's considered a TBI, right? Like anything that's
What?
jarring your brain around. So these guys are like doing, even in training, right? Like concussion grenades and like firing guns in like close quarters and buildings and things like that. All of that stuff creates traumatic brain injury, creates inflammation in the brain. Well, guess what? Your hypothalamus and pituitary are right in the back of your head, right? Like they're right in the middle of your head. They're getting slammed around, right? And it disrupts that mechanism of hormone production and hormone balance, right? So like just by looking at that and addressing that alone, hopefully in a natural way, right? Like supporting it with proper diet and exercise and supplements, and potentially rebooting the production of LH and things like that. It's like a light switch gets flipped back on for these guys. And it's not that it solves all their problems, but it sure as hell like creates a much happier, more motivated individual with a lot more energy to then go about solving the rest of the problems, right? As opposed to just taking a medication and, again, band-aids for symptoms. Like, and that's the same thing that we see with athletes, right?
Well,
Like,
that's
not to compare
huge.
veterans to athletes, because veterans are obviously putting their lives on the line, but it's the same type of transition into the real world.
Yeah.
That's rough and not being addressed properly.
No, but it's kind of like, I mean, you can't really make the software work the way it needs to if the hardware's off. That's kind of the way I look
100%.
at it, and
That's it.
it's
Yeah,
interesting because I've
yeah, you're changing the
never thought about
gas
it.
in a jalopy, right? Like you're
Yeah.
putting premium gas in jalopy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. You got to upgrade the engine in the car. Yeah, and it's like, and we were talking about it earlier, but it's like these are the most badass men on the planet, right? Like they're going through this shit. Like, you like you it's fine to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Like they're going through this shit to the point where like 22 veterans a day, 22 veterans a day
That's
are
just
killing themselves, right?
yeah.
Like they're going through this stuff. Like certainly like Joe Smith, like from down the road, is experiencing some of these problems and shouldn't have a problem talking about it, right? Or understanding that this is a necessary mechanism to survival and to thriving, really.
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, it's kind of like before we were talking about the whole biohacking niche and all the guys that are like even myself where I'm involved in all this stuff and I want to better myself and look at performance. But that being said, most guys aren't necessarily at that place where they feel comfortable opening up about this stuff, right? But I'm gonna be respectful of your time because I know we're coming up on the hour. But dude, yeah, definitely love the conversation and I mean that last bit really left me thinking. I'm like, yo, we there's a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do. Yeah, absolutely. And you're doing a great job. I think, I've been following kind of your podcast, and you're doing a great job of kind of just spreading that message, really. Don't wait till it's too late. Like
Yeah.
live a healthy, fulfilled lifestyle, and, optimize your life. Like don't just try to get by,
No,
right? Like
100%. Yeah.
that's what we should all be striving for. And, that's the goal and that's the mission.
Yeah, 100%. Chaz, man, it was an absolute honor having you on today. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us more about Vitality RX. Let us know all the goods, man.
Yeah, vitalityrx.com is the best place to go. And from there you click get optimized, and it'll take you right to the page where you can order one of those in-home test kits that we talked about. And that can kind of get you started on your journey. Like we said, what gets measured gets managed. So
100%.
take that first step, and you don't have to necessarily subscribe to any of the recommendations or interventions that we provide, but at least take that first step and know your biomarkers and set a benchmark for yourself that you can compare yourself against yourself, right? Not
Yeah.
against the averages that are out there. Everybody's different. So yeah, vitalityrx.com. We're at vitalityrx on Instagram and TikTok. And I try to give the kind of layperson's interpretation of a lot of this stuff on the social channel. So I think so that it's more relatable and people can kind of understand. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I've dedicated my life to this and I'm really passionate about it, but there's things that I don't know. And I like to kind of give my opinion on things and share what I've learned and get feedback, right? And if there's
Yeah.
something for me to learn, I'd love to learn it. And I, encourage discussion around these topics, and everybody to follow and interact as much as possible.
100%, man. Well, I'll make sure I got all the links in the description. Until the next episode, guys, I really hope you enjoyed it. And Chaz, it was an absolute honor, man. Absolute honor. So can't wait to see you.
Likewise, my pleasure.
I'm probably going to have you on again, man. We could talk some more. We got to talk about hair and stuff, man.
Would love it. Would love that. Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Until the next episode.